Today we are looking at the intelligence lifecycle. Think of it as the route an investigation follows. You define the need, plan the work, collect material, process it, analyze it, deliver the judgment, and then use feedback to improve the next round. That sounds simple, but it solves a real problem. A lot of OSINT work starts with search and never really gets past search. You end up with screenshots, tabs, and notes, but not a result that another person can review or use. So the goal of this lesson is not to memorize a diagram. The goal is to build a habit. When a task comes in, you know where to start, what to keep, and when to stop. Let's begin with a request you will hear all the time: check this company. That sounds like a task, but it is still too vague to work with. Are we checking ownership, lawsuits, operating status, public risk signals? If we do not define the question, we can search for hours and still miss the point. Imagine the request is really about a supplier decision. Then the useful version might be: who controls the company, whether there are recent legal disputes, and whether anything in the public record suggests unusual risk. Once the question is clear, the rest of the cycle gets easier. You know which sources matter, what evidence to collect, and what kind of judgment you need to write at the end. A common trap is collecting before planning. It feels busy, but it usually creates noise. The second mistake is saving material without processing it. If you do not record the source, the time, and a short note, you will not be able to trust the material later. The third mistake is delivering a report and never coming back to it. Real investigations need feedback. Maybe the question changed. Maybe the evidence is weak. Maybe the reader wants a more specific answer. So when we say the workflow is broken, we are not talking about laziness in the abstract. We are talking about exactly where the investigation falls apart. Let's make the 7 steps very plain. Requirements means the question you actually need to answer. Planning means deciding which sources to check, in what order, what is out of scope, and when to stop. Collection means gathering lawful public material. Processing means turning that material into something usable. Links, screenshots, timestamps, labels, and notes. Analysis means asking what the evidence supports and what it does not prove. Delivery means turning the judgment into something another person can act on. Feedback means checking whether the answer worked and whether the next round needs to change. Here is a simple example. If you are checking a rumor screenshot, the requirement might be: can this be cited in a report? Planning might start with the original source, then image history, then timestamps, then a second source. Processing keeps the evidence organized. Analysis tells you whether the screenshot is supported or not. Delivery gives a bounded judgment, not a dramatic headline. This is the point where you slow down. A requirement is not a wish. Is this company reliable? Sounds like a question, but it is still too broad to execute well. You need to make it sharper. Say the real concern is cooperation risk. Then the requirement might become: assess public risk signals from the last 3 years and list what should be checked before cooperation. Now planning becomes possible. What do you check first? Which sources matter most? What is out of scope? When do you stop? That is where SMART helps. It reminds you to make the task specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. You can do the same thing for a news claim. If someone says, "Is this story real?" you still need to know whether you are checking truth, citability, or completeness. Those are not the same thing, and planning is where you separate them. Collection is the part most people know well. You search, you browse, you gather material. But processing is what makes the material useful later. If a screenshot has no link, no time, and no note, it is very hard to trust or reuse. Take a rumor screenshot as an example. If you save the original link, the publication time, the platform, and a screenshot ID, you can later compare it with a timeline and see whether it is an old image being reused. Or think about a company announcement. If you keep the announcement page, the publish date, the page title, and the company name, you can later compare the official page with third-party reposts and spot differences right away. That is why processing is not clerical work. It is what turns collected material into evidence you can actually check. Analysis is not just repeating the material in a cleaner format. If you find 3 lawsuits in a company check, the real question is not just, are there lawsuits? The real question is whether they are recent, whether they are related to the core business, and whether they matter for the risk you are asked to assess. The same logic applies to images and locations. If a photo shows a road sign, a building, and weather clues, analysis is not just listing those items. You ask whether they support each other, whether the time makes sense, and whether the location can actually be narrowed down. Delivery should make that clear. A good report gives the judgment, the support, the counterpoints, the limits, and the next checks. So the job is not to dump a folder on someone. The job is to produce a usable judgment. Feedback is what turns the workflow into a loop. After you deliver, you ask a few simple questions. Did we answer the requirement? Is the evidence strong enough? Did the reader ask for a different level of detail? That matters a lot in monitoring work. Public sentiment, supplier risk, and account behavior are not one-time searches. They change. So the cycle has to come back around. You may finish a company review with only public registry data and lawsuits. Then the reader asks, what about the actual controller? Now you need to go back, revise the requirement, and run the cycle again. Without feedback, you just keep producing reports. With feedback, the work gets sharper every time. The same lifecycle works across different OSINT tasks. For company verification, the question is risk. For news verification, the question is whether the claim can be supported. For account verification, the question is whether public clues actually support an association. The details change, but the structure stays the same. You define the need, collect the right sources, process them carefully, and then make a judgment with limits. If you are checking a company, the key sources may be corporate filings, lawsuits, press releases, and hiring patterns. If you are checking a news claim, the key sources may be the original post, image history, publication time, and a second source. If you are checking an account, the key clues may be the public profile, username changes, avatar history, and interaction network. That is why the lifecycle matters. It gives different tasks the same backbone. Let's run a rumor through the cycle. Imagine someone sends you a screenshot and asks whether a major event happened in a specific location. The trap is to answer too quickly. The better move is to define the requirement. Can this screenshot be cited? Then you plan the checks. Find the original source, look at image history, compare timestamps, inspect location clues, and search for a second source. That order matters. If the image is old, reverse image search may expose it immediately. If the timestamp is off, the timeline may already be enough to challenge the claim. If a second source exists, it may support the event or show that the screenshot was taken out of context. Once the material is back on the table, you can analyze it properly. Do the time and place line up? Is there support from another source? If not, the honest answer may be, the public record is not strong enough, so do not cite it yet. That is the lifecycle in action. It keeps you from confusing a clue with a conclusion. If you do this kind of work often, leave yourself a task sheet. It does not need to be fancy. Just record the stage, the action, the source, the material, the checkpoint, and the next step. Why does that matter? Because you may come back later, or someone else may need to continue the case. If the process is written down, the work can be reproduced. This is very useful for ongoing work. A monitoring task may return every week. A supplier review may need updates. An account investigation may grow over time. If the process is tracked, you do not have to start from zero each time. That is the real value of a simple output template. It keeps the investigation alive after the slide deck is closed. The habit I want you to leave with is simple. Define the need, plan the work, process the material, write the judgment, and keep the feedback loop open. If you keep that rhythm, your tools stop being a bookmark collection and start becoming part of a real workflow. One last point, the lifecycle is not there to make the work feel more complicated. It is there to keep you from wasting time, missing context, or jumping to the wrong conclusion too early. Next lesson, we will look at different versions of the intelligence cycle and why organizations draw the loop in different ways.